There we are, circled there. Yeah. And we are very much looking forward to participating with all of you, all of the other consortium members in really making Faro what it can be and delivering high quality applications for organizations around the world using Faro.
Should I do the mission?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. So as Don said, we recently started. We started the company in June, and one of the ways that we try to differentiate ourselves from other software companies is that we specifically target or our clients that are committed to social and environmental values. So that's something that we'd like to point out. And we use a design approach that hopefully, and as we can already see, because we're working for a second client now, are creating software that fits really well with specific organizations and the complex system that they are. I'll hand it over to you for the first part.
Okay, so you probably are all familiar with there are multiple options as far as modern UI frameworks that you could choose. And we really decided, well, how can we compare these things? What makes one stand out from another? And so here's what we did. We first of all decided, well, we want one that's popular. So we want one where there's active development, where it's really cutting edge and it has a very pleasing, snappy appearance. But by the same token, we didn't want something that was necessarily too popular because we didn't want to look like everybody else. We wanted active development. We know that there's lots of activity here. It's fast-paced. We wanted something that would stay relevant for as long as possible. We wanted good documentation. It was important that we be able to find out quickly and easily what is a particular element we'd like to use, what are the range of things that we can do with it, and if we got into trouble, can the documentation help us out? We wanted a level of specificity that was not too low so that we had to work really hard to define things. We wanted it also not to be too high, which would result in having to overwrite and override too much. The appearance, as I mentioned before, was really of primary importance. We wanted it to pop. We wanted it to look different. We wanted it to be very appealing to our users. And I think equally so, we wanted to be able to start with that base and build on it. We didn't want to be locked into a set of decisions that somebody else made, but if they provided us with the building blocks to construct things that maybe they hadn't envisioned, that was what we wanted. Next. So we, as you saw before, we reduced really, for us, there were three choices. One was Fomantic UI, the other was Bootstrap, and the third was Material Design Lite. So I'm just going to kind of quickly show you a comparison between the three, or at least kind of help you understand what attracted us to what we chose. So as you can see here, this is just a particular page on the site. I list the URL up above. I would encourage you, it's not going to pop here, it's not going to stand out, but if you're interested in knowing more about that, to go ahead and check these out yourself. But on the left, and this repeats sort of a typical theme, are the elements that are provided. In addition, there's also modules, things that are kind of built up on top of the elements. Here, what really is an advantage of Fomantic is that it's got a very simple and intuitive to us UI, and it uses natural language. And when Jonathan dives a little bit deeper into some of the details, you'll see that. We also believe that this really had a cutting edge style and appearance. We liked the degree of community support that it had. Now, many of you may be more familiar with sort of the predecessor, Semantic UI Fomantic represents a fork. According to the leader of Fomantic, their intention is to sort of further continue active development, and they intend to merge back at some point. Okay, next quick preview is about Bootstrap, and really a sort of a feature or an advantage of this is the huge installed base. This has been around for a while. It's in very active use. There are ongoing updates to this particular framework. New features and integrations are being produced all the time. Here as well, we as the Faro community have an opportunity to use a very solid framework out of the box. There's both a Seaside implementation for Bootstrap version 3 and version 4. I list the URL to the version 3 repository on GitHub. And then finally, the third of three, Material Design Lite. Obviously, this has the weight of Google behind it. I use Google very frequently. I kind of went back after having seen this and said, well, I wonder if they do really follow their material design guidelines. Sure enough, they did. And you can see, kind of a very familiar palette of UI elements and components to use here. This also has a Seaside implementation, both for Material Design Lite version 1 and for Material Components Web version 2. And I also list the, for your interest, list the GitHub repositories for those two things.
Okay, thank you, Don. So why did we choose Fomantic UI? We started out in a lean way, I should say. We started with a first small project for a client that was in our network, and they gave us all the time and space we needed to figure things out. Because just for the record, Don has worked with Smalltalk in the past, but that's some time ago. I've only worked with Java, to be honest. I was here last year, but I did not have any Faro experience. And our third partner, Dave West, who's sitting in the corner and will speak later today, has worked with Smalltalk extensively. But for us, it was learning a lot of new things. So in order to get up to speed quickly and provide business value for our customers, we wanted to be able to build business web applications quickly. So that was our major motivation. And what ties into what Don already said, it needs to be and needs to have a professional look and feel. So if you look at Fomantic UI, I took a screenshot there on the right side. I'll go and explore it a little bit more. It allows for rapid development of, well, you could say forms-based business applications, but there are a lot of alternative applications, of course. There are a lot of flexible layout options with nested grids, which is something that was lacking in some other frameworks. And they've got a lot of navigational elements, like lists and menus and so on. Besides simple singular elements, they also have support for several advanced elements. They call them modules. Examples of those are calendar or dropdown. And as Don said, there is a really good documentation. So let me show you what I meant just now by dragging this over here. If you go to the website, this is what you'll be welcomed with. And the screenshot I took was this. And obviously you can interact with it because it's in their framework. There's tabs and lists and menus, interesting buttons. There's a little bit higher level components like the accordion. They support messages, several different input styles and so on. And there's some animations, micro animations. Yeah, and this is already a very good starting point for us. So, how do I get back? I'm not a Keynote experienced person. Yep. So the good thing is that they support a lot of HTML elements out of the box, so you don't, in a lot of cases, you don't need to modify the HTML you generate. But it also allows advanced customizations when you need it. And I'll get into that a little later. First, I want to talk about the semantics, because that was a big thing for us, or at least something that was very welcome. The semantics, so the use of natural language, really stood out. It's used mostly in the CSS class names, and also the JavaScript feels more natural than some other frameworks. And the way it works is that it uses the nesting or the level that HTML elements have within your layout or within your page to detect how they should behave. So if you put a certain element embedded within another, it will behave differently than when it's on its own. So that's why it's called Semantic UI, I believe. And at Object-Guild, we design our solutions using a responsibility-driven design, originally coined by Rebecca Wirfs-Brox in the 90s. And that means that we first concentrate on the responsibilities that the objects need to have in our design, and how it collaborates with other objects to fulfill those responsibilities. And during development, obviously, we translate these into methods, and ideally they'd have intention revealing names. And this allows us to tell stories using our objects and our methods. And probably a lot of you will do the same. Well, the nice thing about, and obviously the Smalltalk language helps us a lot there as well. The nice thing about Fomantic UI is that it does the same thing, but then using CSS classes. That makes it possible to tell a story around your UI using CSS classes, a little bit. The trade-off is there is a learning curve. It takes some time to get used to it, because you need to know how elements behave when they're in context of another element. But productivity goes up very quickly, as we've discovered. And we've noticed that it reduces the cognitive load of us as developers when we need to implement UI screens. And it's turned out to be very powerful and easy to work with. So I'll just give a few screenshot examples. This is a thing you probably always all would have done if you work with Seaside. You'd need to create some kind of form to submit some stuff. On the right side, you see Bootstrap. On the left side, Fomantic. The differences aren't that obvious, but they're quite subtle. As you can see, in Fomantic UI, it starts with the form having the class UI form, and then everything underneath behaves a little bit differently because it is inside a form. So you don't have to repeat the fact that it's inside a form. So you type that once, that's around your code, and then it does different things. Another example, which is basically an example of the power of the framework. On the left, you see what Fomantic calls a multiple search selection dropdown. And on the right, you see a single button dropdown of Bootstrap. That's basically the most advanced dropdown that Bootstrap has in its example documentation. Whereas on the left side with Fomantic, you see that there is a list of elements in the dropdown, and you can, just by adding a class to it, make it searchable, and it can be a multi-select dropdown. I'll show you some of that. I wanted to wait with interacting with this before. So if you look at this, You see a whole list with flags and countries. Oops, excuse me. And if you start typing, it will narrow the choices. Similar to here, this is even more advanced. There's tag labels in there. If you click one, it will not only select it, but also change the appearance of the button there. Back to you, Don.
All right, so quickly, we've alluded to these a few times, but the design principles, what did we choose to, or what did we decide was important to us that we wanted to make sure we implemented? Well, first of all, as we started in, we realized that if we use the Fomantic HTML tags to literally, to natively, that we were creating code that was really sort of redundant and repetitive. And so that led to our first design principle, is that we want to wrap the elements that are in Fomantic within the appropriate Smalltalk methods and objects. And that made for much cleaner, much more Smalltalk-like code. In doing so, we came to the kind of happy, came to the happy conclusion that, hey, we can build this incrementally. We don't have to kind of set out to do everything at once. We can add some functionality for a button now, a drop-down list, and then later on we can add it for the more complicated or complex elements and compound elements. So, that was just a sort of a happy realization that we made. We feel that our approach enabled us to stay within Seaside, so we really aren't kind of going against the grain. We're we're utilizing a very tried and true, very effective framework within Smalltalk. And if you wouldn't mind pressing the next one. But we also found out that our approach would help us stay within Fomantic. So we did not have to, we don't have to, when we do it right, sort of translate from, well, here's what Fomantic says about how to work these objects, and here's how we've coded it in Smalltalk. So we really felt like our approach kind of gave us the best of both worlds.
And now, some examples. So, I prepared some examples. Let me try to put these on the same page to make it a bit more visible. Do I have? Yep. All right, there we go. So what you see here is two Fomantic buttons, obviously. Let me switch to mirrored mode, by the way. That makes it much easier. All right. See, now I don't know how to do that. How do I? Fair settings? What's a good setting? Medium? Yeah? Does that change the existing? Not really, does it? Is that better? All right. I've got the screen here. Let me start with the basic example. So this is what you would normally see if you just use a HTML button, right? So that's very simple. And we want something that's more in line with our Fomantic UI. So the only thing you really have to do, besides setting up the Fomantic CSS and JavaScript in your HTML route, if I add UI button here and save, then you see it's already changed. That's very easy. So let me say I want this to be the primary button, because that's what it's supposed to be in some context. It will change color depending on the theme that I'm using in Fomantic UI. You can do extensive theming with different styles and colors and so on. There's Amazon and Twitter and different pre-built styles or themes, but you can build your own. So let's see, this is still a button, so it needs a form to operate. What we can also do is change this into an anchor. And because the class is the same, it just renders as a button. Let's say this is a secondary button. So different color. Imagine we'd want something more advanced. So let's go to the button documentation and look around. What's my screen design look like? What do I need in this particular UI design? Let's say we want this like button here, the red button. So that's what's called a label button. And there's two next to each other, so we'll concentrate on the first here. So what you can see is that it's actually a nested a set of nested HTML components. So let's start with HTML div class UI labeled button. And then inside there's a red button. And inside is an I tag, which is not available by default, if I'm correct. And it needs a class heart icon. Say again? Oh, do I have 1 minute? Aha. Yep. All right. Got this first part here, and then the second part is the anchor again, but now it says it's a basic red left pointing label. And that's the actual anchor, so we can leave that callback in place. Change the value here. That should be it. Close that one. Am I complete here? No. I have it already. Here, you mean? That's okay, that should be there. I think this is okay. There it is. So it's that easy to make a rich UI using Fomantic. I have a couple more minutes. I have a more advanced example. So let me use this button to close it. Ah, yes, there it is. Advanced example. So here you're looking at a UI calendar. I put the HTML or what's needed to make it in there already. It's a nice component. It's a relatively high level. You can click on it. You get this widget. Obviously, you can select, this is a date time widget. You can select the time and so on. So what we did, instead of this, we've created a compound extension subclass and we call these FUI calendar. The only thing I need to give it is a placeholder. Oops. And this was a bit of JavaScript to initialize the calendar widget. And get rid of that too. If I now refresh, it's still there. So, but if you look at, so this makes it really easy to add a calendar component, obviously. If we go to modules, calendar, and we go and look at some examples, there are different examples. You can do a date one that doesn't have a time component. You can do only time. You can select a year first, 24-hour format, all these kinds of things. And as you can see, they require a JavaScript initialization value. Simplest thing that we could think of was to just say type date. As you can see, it's now a date. What's not common in Europe is that Sunday is the first day of the month, of the week, and I can't seem to be able to select these days here that were part of July or are part of September. So if I look at settings here, which is not very convenient, there you go. There is a first day of week, and it can be 0 is Sunday, so let's say we'll do first day.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.